The piercing alarm of the emergency medical alert cut through the executive boardroom like a blade, instantly silencing the quarterly projections presentation that had been dominating Victoria Sterling's morning. Her assistant's trembling voice crackled through the intercom, with words that would shatter her carefully orchestrated world in seconds. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Miss Sterling, it's Emma. My daughter Lily collapsed at school. The doctors at Children's Hospital say she needs immediate transport to the specialized cardiac unit in Denver. Her heart condition, it's gotten worse. They're saying we have maybe an hour before. The voice broke off into desperate sobs. Victoria Sterling, CEO of Sterling Aerospace and one of the most powerful women in the aviation industry, felt her blood turn to ice. Emma Rodriguez had been more than just her executive assistant for the past 8 years. She had been the steady presence who kept Victoria's empire running smoothly, who remembered every important detail, who had become like family. And little Lily, with her bright smile and endless questions about airplanes whenever she visited the office, had captured Victoria's heart in ways that surprised everyone, including Victoria herself. Without hesitation, Victoria swept the boardroom clear with a single command. Meeting's over. Everyone out, now. Her board members, accustomed to her decisive leadership style, filed out without question, sensing the urgency that had transformed their usually composed CEO into someone they barely recognized. Victoria's mind raced through the logistics. Denver was 200 miles away through mountain terrain that ground transport couldn't navigate quickly enough. Commercial flights were out of the question with the scheduling delays. But her private helicopter, a state-of-the-art Sterling H-47 prototype worth $12 million, could make the journey in 40 minutes. It was their only hope. 20 minutes later, Victoria stood on the rooftop helipad of Sterling Tower, her usually immaculate business attire replaced by flight gear, as her chief pilot Marcus Chen ran through the final pre-flight checks. Emma clutched 6-year-old Lily against her chest, the little girl's pallor stark against her mother's dark coat. The child's breathing was labored, each breath a struggle that made Victoria's chest tighten with protective fury. "We're ready for takeoff, Miss Sterling," Marcus announced, his voice carrying the confidence that had made him her most trusted pilot for 5 years. "Weather's clear, flight path approved. We'll have Lily at Denver Children's in 38 minutes. Victoria nodded, helping Emma and Lily into the helicopter's luxurious passenger compartment. Everything was going according to plan until Marcus turned the ignition and nothing happened. The sophisticated turbine engines that should have roared to life remained silent. He tried again. Still nothing. "What's wrong?" Victoria demanded, though she could already see the answer in Marcus's troubled expression as he frantically worked through the startup sequence. "I don't know. All systems were green 15 minutes ago. Now I'm getting nothing from the primary ignition system." Marcus's hands flew over the controls, checking every switch and gauge with the precision that had earned him his reputation. "The backup systems aren't responding either. This doesn't make sense." Victoria felt time slipping away like sand through her fingers. Lily's condition was deteriorating by the minute, her small frame trembling with each increasingly difficult breath. "How long to fix it?" "I don't know. Could be minutes, could be hours. I've never seen a failure pattern like this." Marcus's frustration was evident as he continued his diagnostic routine. "The electrical systems are functioning, fuel flow is normal, but something's preventing the ignition sequence from completing." Without thinking, Victoria pulled out her phone and activated her social media live stream, a platform she rarely used for anything other than corporate announcements. Desperate times called for desperate measures, and if there was even a remote chance that someone out there could help, she had to try. "This is Victoria Sterling of Sterling Aerospace," she said into the camera, her voice carrying an urgency that her millions of followers had never heard before. "I need help. My helicopter won't start, and we have a critically ill 6-year-old who needs to get to Denver Children's Hospital immediately. If there's anyone out there, any mechanic, any aviation expert, anyone who knows about Sterling H-47 helicopters, please come to Sterling Tower immediately." She paused, looking at Lily's increasingly pale face, then back at the camera. "I'll pay $1 million to anyone who can get this helicopter running in the next 30 minutes. $1 million. Cash. No questions asked. A little girl's life depends on it." The live stream went viral within minutes. Victoria's phone exploded with notifications, as her desperate plea was shared across every social media platform, news outlet, and aviation forum on the internet. The hashtag #MillionDollarFix began trending worldwide as people shared the video of the powerful CEO stripped of all pretense, pleading for help to save a child's life. What Victoria didn't know was that 15 minutes earlier, in the alley behind Sterling Tower, a man named Daniel Torres had been digging through the dumpster behind the building's cafeteria, searching for something edible for his evening meal. At 42, Daniel had been living on the streets of Chicago for 8 months, ever since the aerospace company where he'd worked for 20 years had downsized his entire department. His expertise in helicopter maintenance, earned through 15 years of military service and 5 years in civilian aviation, had become worthless overnight when the industry consolidated and younger, cheaper technicians flooded the market. Daniel's weathered hands, scarred from years of working with metal and machinery, carefully sorted through the discarded food, his practiced eye identifying what was still safe to eat. His brown hair, streaked with premature gray from stress and exposure to the elements, was longer than it had been since his teenage years, but his dark eyes still held the sharp intelligence that had made him one of the military's most reliable helicopter mechanics. The cardboard shelter he'd constructed in the alley provided minimal protection from Chicago's harsh autumn winds, but it was better than the overcrowded shelters, where personal belongings disappeared and sleep was impossible. Daniel had learned to survive on his own, maintaining his dignity even as his circumstances had stripped away everything else he'd once taken for granted. His daughter Sophia was 12 now, living with his ex-wife in a suburb he could no longer afford to visit. The divorce had been inevitable after he'd lost his job and fallen behind on mortgage payments, but the loss of daily contact with his bright, curious daughter hurt more than the hunger or the cold or the way people looked through him as if he were invisible. Sophia had inherited his love of mechanics and engineering, always asking questions about how things worked, always eager to help him fix broken toys or bicycles. She had no idea her father was living on the streets, believing instead the story his ex-wife had told her about him working overseas. Daniel's phone, a battered device he'd managed to keep activated through a discount program for homeless individuals, buzzed with a notification. The screen was cracked. The battery held only half a charge, but it still connected him to the world he'd lost. Usually, he ignored the social media alerts, but something about the urgency in the notification made him look. Victoria Sterling's livestream filled his small screen, her desperate voice cutting through the ambient noise of the city around him. Daniel recognized the helicopter in the background immediately. The Sterling H-47 was a magnificent machine, representing the cutting edge of civilian aviation technology. He'd worked on similar models during his military service, and it actually helped design some of the systems that Sterling Aerospace had later incorporated into their civilian aircraft. As Victoria described the symptoms, Daniel's trained mind began analyzing the problem. The combination of electrical systems functioning normally while ignition failed to engage suggested a very specific issue that most mechanics wouldn't recognize. It was a problem he'd encountered exactly once before, during a deployment in Afghanistan when a sandstorm had compromised the microsensors that controlled the fuel injection timing. The fix required specific knowledge and a particular sequence of system resets that wasn't covered in standard maintenance manuals. Daniel looked at his reflection in a storefront window. His clothes were clean but obviously worn, his face gaunt from irregular meals, his overall appearance marking him as someone who belonged on the streets rather than in the gleaming tower where Victoria Sterling was offering $1 million for the solution he carried in his head. The security guards would never let him past the lobby, and even if they did, why would a powerful CEO trust a homeless man with her $12 million helicopter? But as he watched the live stream, he saw something that changed his mind. The little girl in the background, held by a woman who was clearly her mother, looked exactly like Sophia had at that age. The same dark hair, the same delicate features, the same way of curling against her mother when she was scared or unwell. The sight hit Daniel like a physical blow, bringing back memories of countless nights when he'd held his own daughter through fevers and bad dreams, promising her that everything would be okay. The mother's expression of helpless desperation was one Daniel recognized from his own mirror during the worst days of his divorce, when he'd felt powerless to protect his child from the chaos his life had become. Here was another father, somewhere, probably pacing in a hospital corridor or racing through traffic, knowing his daughter needed help that seemed impossibly out of reach. Daniel made a decision that would change everything. He walked the 12 blocks to Sterling Tower, his worn sneakers quiet against the sidewalk. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. His mind rehearsing the technical explanation he'd need to give. The security desk in the marble lobby was staffed by 2 guards, who looked at him with the practiced dismissal that homeless individuals had learned to expect from people in uniform. "I need to see Victoria Sterling," Daniel announced, his voice carrying more confidence than his appearance suggested he had any right to possess. "I can fix her helicopter." The guards exchanged a look that spoke volumes about their assessment of Daniel's mental state and general credibility. "Sir, you need to move along. This is private property." Daniel pulled out his phone, showing them the live stream that was still broadcasting Victoria's increasingly desperate attempts to diagnose the helicopter's problems. "She's offering $1 million to anyone who can fix it. I know what's wrong and I know how to fix it." "Sure you do," the older guard replied with barely concealed amusement. "And I'm the Pope. Move along before we call the police." Daniel's frustration flared, but he forced himself to remain calm. Getting arrested would help no one, least of all the little girl whose life hung in the balance. "Look, I understand how this looks, but I spent 15 years maintaining military helicopters, and I recognize the symptoms she's describing. The Sterling H-47 has a known issue with its microsensor array when exposed to electromagnetic interference from certain weather patterns. The fix requires a specific reset sequence that takes exactly 47 seconds to complete." The technical specificity of his explanation made the guards pause. This wasn't the rambling of someone having a mental health crisis or trying to run a scam. Daniel was speaking with the precise language of someone who genuinely understood aircraft systems. The younger guard looked uncertain. "Even if you know about helicopters, how do we know you're not just trying to get access to the building for other reasons?" Daniel understood their skepticism, but time was running out. Through the lobby's floor-to-ceiling windows, he could see people gathering on the street, drawn by news of Victoria Sterling's $1 million challenge. Some were legitimate mechanics and aviation professionals, but most were opportunists hoping to get lucky or gain access to the Sterling Tower for their own purposes. "Call the military service record database," Daniel said, pulling a worn piece of paper from his wallet. It was his discharge documentation, carefully preserved through months of living rough, because it was one of the few things that proved who he used to be. Staff Sergeant Daniel Torres, 15th Aviation Maintenance Company. "I was decorated twice for keeping helicopters operational under combat conditions." The guards examined the documents, noting the official seals and the technical specializations listed in Daniel's service record. Helicopter maintenance, avionics systems, emergency repair procedures. The paperwork was authentic, though the man presenting it looked nothing like the crisp military professional described in the official language. "Even if this is real," the older guard said carefully, "Ms. Sterling is dealing with her company's top mechanics and outside experts. What makes you think you can solve a problem they can't?" Daniel's answer was simple and devastating in its honesty. "Because I helped design the system that's failing." 5 years ago, Sterling Aerospace contracted with Morrison Aviation Systems to develop the ignition control protocols for the H-47. I was the lead technician on that project before the company laid off my entire department to cut costs. The revelation hung in the air like a challenge to everything the guards thought they understood about success and failure, about who deserved to be taken seriously and who could be dismissed. Here was a man who had literally helped create the technology that was now failing, reduced to homelessness by the same corporate decisions that had made Victoria Sterling wealthy. The younger guard reached for his radio. "Control, this is lobby security. We have a situation that needs escalation to Miss Sterling directly. There's a man here claiming he can fix the helicopter, and his credentials check out." While they waited for a response, Daniel watched through the windows as more people gathered outside. He could see news vans arriving, reporters setting up cameras, aviation professionals rushing toward the building with toolboxes and diagnostic equipment. The circus was building, but Daniel knew that most of them would be working from the same standard troubleshooting procedures that had already failed Marcus Chen. The radio crackled with Victoria's voice, tight with stress and growing desperation. "Send him up. I don't care what he looks like or where he came from. If he thinks he can help, I need to hear what he has to say." The elevator ride to the 60th floor felt endless. Daniel hadn't been inside a building this tall in months, and the sensation of rapid upward movement after so much time spent at ground level made him slightly dizzy. He caught his reflection in the polished elevator doors and winced at what he saw. His appearance would shock Victoria Sterling, but there was nothing he could do about that now. The executive floor of Sterling Tower was a monument to corporate success. Polished marble floors, floor-to-ceiling windows offering panoramic views of Chicago, original artwork that probably cost more than Daniel had earned in some years. It was a world he'd once moved through comfortably as a valued contractor. But now he felt like an intruder whose presence contaminated the carefully maintained perfection. Victoria Sterling stood at the center of it all, no longer the composed executive from the boardroom presentations Daniel had seen on business news programs. Her usually perfect hair was disheveled from the helicopter helmet she'd donned earlier, her expensive suit wrinkled from stress and movement. Most striking were her eyes, which held the desperate intensity of someone watching time run out for a child she'd sworn to protect. "You're the mechanic?" she asked, looking Daniel up and down with an expression that mixed hope with barely concealed skepticism. Her gaze took in his worn clothing, his weathered appearance, the general signs of someone who'd been living rough for an extended period. "I'm Daniel Torres. I can fix your helicopter." His voice was steady despite the surreal nature of the situation. Here he was, a homeless man standing in one of Chicago's most expensive office spaces, promising to solve a problem that had stumped some of the aviation industry's best professionals. Victoria's assistant Emma appeared beside her, still holding Lily, whose condition had visibly worsened during the delay. The little girl's breathing was more labored, her skin taking on the grayish pallor that indicated her heart was struggling to maintain adequate circulation. Every minute they spent talking was a minute closer to a crisis that might be irreversible. "What's wrong with it?" Victoria demanded, her business instincts overriding her personal reservations about Daniel's appearance. Results mattered more than presentation when a child's life hung in the balance. Daniel's response was immediate and technical. "Electromagnetic interference is causing microsensor drift in your fuel injection timing system. The sensors are reading atmospheric conditions incorrectly and preventing proper ignition sequencing. It happens when the H-47 systems interact with certain combinations of atmospheric pressure and ambient electrical fields." Victoria's expression shifted from skepticism to sharp attention. This wasn't generic troubleshooting advice or desperate guessing. Daniel was describing a specific technical problem with the precision of someone who understood exactly how the aircraft's systems functioned. "How do you know that?" she asked. Daniel's answer was both professional and deeply personal. "Because I designed those systems. 5 years ago, your company contracted Morrison Aviation to develop the H-47's avionics package. I was the lead technician on the ignition control protocols. I know this aircraft better than anyone except the engineers who signed off on the final specifications." The confession hit Victoria like a revelation and an accusation simultaneously. Here was living proof of how corporate decisions affected real people. The downsizing and consolidation that had improved Sterling Aerospace's profit margins had put one of their most knowledgeable contractors on the street. Now, in a cruel twist of irony, she needed his expertise to save a child's life. "What happened to you?" Victoria asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Daniel's response was matter-of-fact, delivered without self-pity or accusation. "Morrison Aviation lost the Sterling contract when you brought helicopter maintenance in-house to reduce costs. They laid off my entire department 6 months later. I couldn't find comparable work at my age and experience level. Younger technicians with basic certifications cost half as much as someone with my specialized knowledge. The economic logic was brutal, but familiar." Victoria had made similar decisions countless times, viewing personnel costs as line items to be optimized rather than human lives to be considered. The efficiency gains had been substantial, contributing to Sterling Aerospace's position as the industry leader. But standing here now, facing the human cost of those decisions in the form of Daniel Torres, the calculus felt different. Emma's voice interrupted the tense conversation. "Lily's getting worse. We need to move now, or we're going to lose our window." Victoria made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "Show me. Show me exactly what needs to be done to fix the helicopter." Daniel nodded, his professional instincts taking over despite the emotional complexity of the situation. They rode the elevator to the roof in silence, accompanied by Emma and Lily, whose condition continued to deteriorate with each passing minute. The system is working exactly as designed, but it's working with incorrect data. The fix requires a manual override sequence that resets the sensor calibration and forces the system to reacquire current environmental data. Victoria watched this exchange with growing hope and admiration. Daniel's explanation made perfect sense from an engineering perspective, and his confidence suggested he'd encountered this exact problem before. More importantly, his hands were already moving through the override sequence with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd performed it many times. "How long?" Victoria asked, aware that time was becoming critical for Lily's condition. 47 seconds for the reset sequence. Then another 30 seconds for the system to reacquire and stabilize, Daniel replied without looking up from his work. His fingers moved over switches and controls with surgical precision, each movement part of a carefully choreographed sequence that would either solve their crisis or confirm that the problem was more complex than he'd diagnosed. The seconds ticked by with agonizing slowness. Emma held Lily closer, the little girl's breathing becoming more labored with each passing moment. Victoria found herself holding her breath, willing Daniel's solution to work, praying to whatever gods might be listening, that this homeless man, who'd appeared like an answer to her desperate livestream, really could save them all. 47 seconds after Daniel began the reset sequence, he stepped back from the helicopter's control systems. "Try it now." Marcus slid into the pilot's seat and initiated the startup sequence they'd been unable to complete for the past hour. The turbine engines responded immediately, roaring to life with the smooth power that indicated all systems were functioning normally. The aircraft's sophisticated diagnostics confirmed what their ears were already telling them. The Sterling H-47 was ready to fly. Victoria felt a surge of relief so intense it nearly brought her to her knees. They had done it. Somehow, against all odds, a homeless man with nothing left to lose had provided the expertise that her company's best technicians couldn't match. Lily would make it to Denver Children's Hospital. The little girl would have her chance at life. "Let's go," Victoria announced, helping Emma and Lily into the passenger compartment while Marcus completed his pre-flight checklist with renewed confidence. The aircraft was running perfectly, all systems green, ready for the life-saving flight to Denver. But as they prepared for takeoff, Victoria realized she had forgotten something crucial in the relief of the moment. She turned back to Daniel, who was standing beside the helipad, watching their preparations with quiet satisfaction at a job well done. "Wait," she called out, stepping away from the helicopter despite the urgency of their mission. "I owe you $1 million. Daniel's response surprised everyone within earshot. "Keep your money. Use it to help other people who need it more than I do. Just get that little girl to the hospital." Victoria stared at him in disbelief. In a world where everyone had an angle, where every favor came with expectations attached, here was someone who had just solved an impossible problem and was refusing the reward she'd promised. It challenged everything she thought she understood about human nature and the motivations that drove people's actions. "I can't just keep $1 million that I promised to pay," Victoria protested. "You earned it. You saved Lily's life." Daniel's smile was tired but genuine, the expression of someone who had found purpose in the midst of his own crisis. "Lady, I've been homeless for 8 months. I've learned that the most valuable things in life can't be bought with money. That little girl getting the medical care she needs is worth more than any payment you could offer." The helicopter's engines were running. Marcus was indicating they needed to depart immediately to maintain their medical priority status for landing in Denver. Victoria knew she couldn't delay any longer, but she also couldn't simply fly away and leave Daniel standing on the rooftop as if this encounter had never happened. "This isn't over," she told him, her voice carrying a promise that neither of them fully understood yet. "When I get back, we're going to talk. About the money, about your situation, about a lot of things." Daniel nodded, stepping back as the helicopter prepared for takeoff. "Just take care of that little girl. Everything else can wait." As the Sterling H-47 lifted off from the tower's helipad, Victoria looked down at Daniel's solitary figure growing smaller against the backdrop of Chicago's skyline. She was flying toward Denver to save one child's life, but she couldn't shake the feeling that Daniel Torres had just saved something important in her as well. The successful CEO who had built an empire on calculated decisions and strategic thinking was beginning to understand that some of life's most important moments couldn't be planned or purchased. They had to be earned through human connection, genuine expertise, and the willingness to help others without expecting anything in return. As Chicago disappeared behind them and the Colorado mountains appeared ahead, Victoria realized that her most important business would begin not in Denver's hospital, but back on that rooftop with a homeless man who had just taught her something profound about value and purpose. The flight to Denver Children's Hospital was smooth and swift, the Sterling H-47 performing flawlessly thanks to Daniel's expertise. Victoria spent the journey watching Emma hold Lily, seeing the little girl's color slowly improve as they climbed to a cruising altitude, where the helicopter's medical oxygen system could provide additional support. Marcus's voice was calm and professional as he coordinated with air traffic control, but Victoria could hear the relief in his updates about their progress and estimated arrival time. 38 minutes after takeoff, they touched down on the hospital's helipad, where a medical team was waiting with equipment and expertise that represented Lily's best chance at survival. Victoria watched Emma disappear into the hospital with her daughter, the little girl now conscious and responding to the medical team's preliminary assessment. The crisis wasn't over, but they had bought precious time and brought Lily to the specialists who could address her cardiac condition with the latest surgical techniques. As Marcus shut down the helicopter and completed his post-flight checklist, Victoria found herself thinking not about the successful conclusion of their emergency flight, but about the man they'd left standing on the rooftop in Chicago. Daniel Torres had appeared in her life for less than 2 hours, but his impact felt disproportionate to the brief duration of their encounter. The flight back to Chicago gave Victoria time to process what had happened and to consider what it meant for her understanding of success, value, and human worth. She had built Sterling Aerospace into a dominant force in the aviation industry through strategic decisions that prioritized efficiency and profitability. The consolidation that had eliminated Daniel's position at Morrison Aviation had been one of dozens of similar moves that had strengthened her company's market position while reducing operational costs. But seeing the human cost of those decisions in Daniel's story, and then witnessing his expertise and character in their moment of crisis, forced Victoria to confront the complexity of her business philosophy. The man who had saved Lily's life was the same person her corporate strategies had put on the street. The irony was both profound and uncomfortable. When they landed back at Sterling Tower, Victoria was surprised to find that Daniel was still there, sitting on a bench near the helipad with the patient stillness of someone accustomed to waiting. The autumn evening was growing cold, and his worn jacket provided minimal protection against the wind that swept across the building's exposed rooftop. But he looked up with genuine interest when the helicopter touched down, clearly hoping for good news about Lily's condition. "How is she?" Daniel asked as Victoria approached, his first words focused entirely on the child, rather than any personal considerations. "Stable and responding well to treatment," Victoria reported, noting how Daniel's shoulders relaxed with relief at the news. "The doctors think they caught the cardiac episode early enough to prevent permanent damage. She's going to need surgery, but her prognosis is good." Daniel nodded with satisfaction, as if Lily's welfare had been his primary concern throughout the entire crisis. Victoria realized that this was probably exactly the case. Despite his own desperate circumstances, Daniel had focused entirely on solving the problem that would save a child's life, without any apparent consideration of how the situation might benefit him personally. "Thank you," Victoria said, the words carrying weight that went beyond simple gratitude for technical assistance. "Without your help, we would have lost her." Daniel's response was characteristically modest. "You would have figured it out eventually. Maybe not in time, but someone would have identified the sensor problem and implemented the reset sequence." Victoria doubted this assessment, but she didn't argue the point. Instead, she addressed the question that had been occupying her thoughts during the flight to Denver and back. "About the money. I meant what I said about the $1 million. You earned it, and I intend to pay it." Daniel stood up from the bench, his movements showing the stiffness that came from sitting too long in cold conditions. "And I meant what I said about not needing your money. There are people in this city who are worse off than I am. People with children and medical bills and situations that money can actually fix. Use it to help them." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several people who had apparently been waiting for Victoria's return. Marcus Chen approached with a tablet displaying news coverage of the emergency flight, showing that their story had continued to develop and spread while they were en route to Denver. The live stream of Victoria's original desperate plea had been viewed millions of times, shared across social media platforms, and picked up by every major news outlet. The narrative had evolved from a simple emergency rescue to a human interest story about the unlikely hero who had solved the crisis. Daniel's military service record had been discovered and verified, his expertise confirmed by aviation professionals who recognized the technical accuracy of his diagnosis. More significantly, public interest had focused on the broader implications of Daniel's situation. Here was a decorated military veteran with specialized skills living on the street because economic forces had eliminated his profession. The story resonated with people who understood how quickly circumstances could change, how easily someone could fall through the cracks of an economy that valued efficiency over human welfare. "Mr. Torres, I'm Jennifer Walsh from Channel 7 News," announced a reporter who had apparently gained access to the rooftop. Her camera operator was already filming, capturing Daniel's reaction to the media attention that had surrounded his brief moment of public prominence. Daniel looked uncomfortable with the sudden focus, stepping back slightly as if he could physically distance himself from the spotlight that had found him. "I'm not interested in interviews. The important thing is that the little girl got the help she needed." But the reporter pressed on, clearly recognizing the human interest value of Daniel's story. "Our viewers want to know about your background, about how someone with your expertise ended up homeless, about what this experience has meant to you." Victoria stepped between Daniel and the camera, her protective instincts engaging in a way that surprised her. "This interview is over, Mr. Torres has had a long day, and he deserves some privacy." The authority in her voice was absolute, backed by the power that came with owning the building they were standing on and employing security personnel who would enforce her wishes without question. The reporter and camera operator reluctantly retreated, but Victoria knew that this would not be the end of media interest in Daniel's story. As the rooftop cleared of reporters and onlookers, Victoria found herself alone with Daniel and Marcus, the three of them standing in the gathering darkness of the Chicago evening. The city lights were beginning to twinkle below them, creating a panoramic view that never failed to remind Victoria of what she had accomplished in building her business empire. But tonight, the view looked different. Instead of seeing the physical manifestation of her success, Victoria saw a city full of people whose stories she had never considered, whose struggles remained invisible from her executive suite 60 floors above street level. Daniel Torres represented thousands of individuals whose expertise and experience had been discarded in the name of operational efficiency, people who had value that couldn't be measured in quarterly reports or shareholder presentations. "Where are you staying tonight?" Victoria asked Daniel, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Daniel's response confirmed her assumption. "I have a place in an alley about 15 blocks from here. It's not much, but it's dry and relatively safe." The casual way he described homelessness, as if it were a temporary inconvenience rather than a fundamental crisis, spoke to either remarkable resilience or a form of emotional protection that allowed him to cope with circumstances that would have devastated most people. Victoria made a decision that felt both impulsive and inevitable. "That's not acceptable. I'm putting you up in a hotel tonight, and tomorrow we're going to discuss your situation properly." Daniel's immediate response was to shake his head. "I appreciate the offer, but I don't accept charity. I've managed on my own for 8 months, and I'll continue to manage." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, the determination of someone who had lost almost everything but refused to surrender his dignity. Victoria recognized something of herself in that stubborn independence, the refusal to accept help that might come with strings attached or expectations that compromised personal autonomy. "It's not charity," Victoria replied, her mind working through the implications of what she was about to propose. "It's a business proposition. I want to hire you." Both Daniel and Marcus looked at her with surprise, clearly not expecting the conversation to take this direction. Victoria herself was somewhat surprised by the offer, but as she thought through the logic, it made perfect sense from both humanitarian and business perspectives. "Sterling Aerospace has been having intermittent problems with our helicopter fleet," Victoria continued, the justification becoming more solid as she articulated it. "Issues that our current maintenance team hasn't been able to identify or resolve consistently. We need someone with deep technical knowledge of the systems, someone who can diagnose problems that stump conventional troubleshooting approaches." Daniel's expression was skeptical, but interested. "You're offering me a job based on one successful repair?" Victoria's response was immediate and confident. "I'm offering you a job based on 15 years of military expertise, 5 years of civilian aviation experience, and intimate knowledge of the systems that power our entire fleet. The fact that you diagnosed and fixed a problem that stumped our best people in under 2 minutes just confirms what your service record already told me about your technical capabilities." The offer was both generous and strategic. Daniel's knowledge of Sterling Aerospace's helicopter systems was genuinely valuable, and his expertise could prevent future emergencies while improving the overall reliability of their aircraft. But Victoria also recognized that hiring Daniel would address a moral debt that she had only recently become aware of, an opportunity to correct some of the human cost associated with her past business decisions. Marcus, who had been listening to this exchange with growing understanding of its implications, added his own endorsement. "Mr. Torres, I've been flying helicopters for 20 years, and I've never seen anyone diagnose a system failure that quickly or accurately. If Miss Sterling is offering you a position, you should seriously consider it." Daniel was quiet for a long moment, processing the unexpected turn his day had taken. 12 hours earlier, he had been searching for food in a dumpster, facing another night of sleeping rough in an alley. Now he was standing on top of one of Chicago's most prestigious buildings, being offered employment by one of the aviation industry's most successful executives. What would the job entail? Daniel asked, his practical nature asserting itself over the emotional impact of the situation. Victoria's answer was thoughtful and comprehensive. Chief Helicopter Maintenance Specialist, responsible for diagnosing complex technical problems, training our current maintenance staff, and developing protocols that prevent the kind of failure we experience today. The position would include competitive salary, full benefits, housing assistance, and the resources you need to do the job effectively. The offer hung in the air between them like a bridge spanning two completely different worlds. Daniel Torres stood on the rooftop of Sterling Tower, wearing clothes that marked him as someone society had discarded, being offered a position that could restore not just his livelihood, but his sense of purpose and dignity. The complexity of the moment wasn't lost on him. Victoria Sterling, whose corporate decisions had indirectly contributed to his homelessness, was now proposing to be the architect of his recovery. Daniel's weathered hands gripped the metal railing of the helipad as he considered the implications. 8 months of survival on Chicago's streets had taught him to be suspicious of offers that seemed too good to be true, to look for the hidden costs and unstated expectations that came with apparent generosity. Yet something in Victoria's demeanor suggested this was more than guilt-driven charity, or a public relations gesture designed to capitalize on the positive media attention surrounding their emergency rescue. "Why me?" Daniel asked, his voice carrying the wariness of someone who had learned that corporate executives rarely acted without calculating the benefits to themselves and their organizations. "You could hire any number of certified helicopter mechanics with clean employment records and professional references. Why take a chance on someone who's been living on the streets?" Victoria's response revealed a depth of thought that surprised both Daniel and Marcus, who had worked for her long enough to recognize when she was operating from genuine conviction rather than strategic calculation. "Because experience has taught me that the most valuable insights often come from people who understand systems from the ground up, who have worked with their hands rather than just managing from executive suites. You didn't just fix our helicopter today. You diagnosed a problem that none of our expensive consultants or certified technicians could identify." She paused, looking out over the city lights that stretched to the horizon in every direction. "But more than that, you demonstrated something that's become rare in corporate environments. You prioritized solving a problem over personal gain. You refused payment because you understood that helping a sick child was more important than enriching yourself. That kind of integrity is exactly what Sterling Aerospace needs as we grow and face more complex challenges." Marcus nodded his agreement, adding his own perspective as someone who had seen the aviation industry evolve over 2 decades. "The technical knowledge is important, but what impressed me most was how quickly you moved from diagnoses to solution. Most mechanics would have spent an hour running through standard troubleshooting procedures. You went straight to the root cause because you understood the system at a level that comes from actually building and designing it." Daniel found himself thinking about his daughter Sophia, now 12, and living with his ex-wife in a suburb that felt like another universe from his current circumstances. The job Victoria was offering would give him the financial stability to re-establish contact with Sophia, to become a father she could be proud of, rather than a source of embarrassment or worry. The possibility of rebuilding that relationship was more compelling than any salary or benefits package, but accepting the position would also mean trusting Victoria Sterling with his future, placing his recovery in the hands of someone whose business philosophy had contributed to his downfall in the first place. The irony was complex and uncomfortable. Could he work for someone whose corporate decisions had eliminated his previous career? Could he trust that her apparent change of heart was genuine, rather than a temporary emotional response to the day's dramatic events? "I need to understand something," Daniel said, his engineer's mind seeking clarity about the fundamental dynamics of what Victoria was proposing. "This isn't about fixing your public image or capitalizing on the positive media attention from today's rescue, is it? Because if that's what this is, I'm not interested in being part of a corporate redemption narrative." Victoria's answer was immediate and unequivocal. "This is about recognizing value where I failed to see it before. About understanding that efficiency isn't the only metric that matters in business. About building an organization that creates value for everyone involved, rather than just maximizing profits for shareholders." The sincerity in her voice was compelling, but Daniel had learned to be cautious about promises made in emotional moments. What happens when the media attention dies down and helping the homeless helicopter mechanic stops being good publicity? What happens when the quarterly reports show that hiring expensive expertise cuts into profit margins? Victoria's response revealed that she had been thinking about these same questions during the flight to Denver and back. "Then we'll have a company that's better at what it does, because we hired people based on competence rather than cost optimization. We'll have prevented future emergencies because we invested in real expertise rather than cutting corners on maintenance and safety." She turned to face Daniel directly, her expression carrying the kind of determination that had built Sterling Aerospace into an industry leader. "But more importantly, we'll have done the right thing, not because it's profitable or strategic, but because it's the decent human response to recognizing that our past decisions had unintended consequences for people who deserved better." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Emma Rodriguez, who had returned from Denver Children's Hospital with an update on Lily's condition. Her face showed the exhaustion that comes from hours of anxiety and fear, but also the relief of someone who had received hopeful news about her child's prognosis. "Miss Sterling, I can't thank you enough," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "The doctors say Lily's surgery went perfectly. They were able to correct the cardiac defect completely, and she should make a full recovery." Victoria felt a surge of gratitude and satisfaction that went beyond anything she had experienced in years of business achievements. Lily's successful treatment represented something more valuable than any contract signing or market expansion. It was proof that resources and expertise could be used to create genuine positive impact in individual lives. "How is she feeling?" Victoria asked, genuinely concerned about the little girl who had become the center of their crisis and recovery. Emma's smile was the first genuinely happy expression any of them had seen from her all day. "She's asking when she can ride in the helicopter again. The doctors say she'll be ready to travel home in 3 days, and she wants to know if Mr. Torres will be there to explain how the engine works." Daniel felt something tighten in his chest at the mention of Lily's interest in his work. Children's curiosity about mechanical systems had always been one of his favorite aspects of his profession, the opportunity to share knowledge with young minds that approached complex subjects without preconceptions or limitations. "Tell her I'll be happy to explain anything she wants to know about helicopters," Daniel said, his voice carrying warmth that surprised Victoria with its emotional depth. "And tell her that she was very brave today, and that I'm proud of how well she handled a scary situation." Emma's expression grew thoughtful as she studied Daniel's face, noting the genuine concern and affection in his voice when he spoke about her daughter. "Lily is going to want to thank you properly when she's feeling better. She's been asking about the man who fixed the helicopter so she could get to the hospital." The human connection represented by Lily's gratitude provided Daniel with something he hadn't experienced in months of homelessness. Evidence that his skills and knowledge could make a meaningful difference in someone's life. The technical expertise that had seemed worthless in an economy that valued cost reduction over experience had proven itself invaluable when applied to a genuine emergency. Victoria watched this exchange with growing understanding of what she had been missing in her approach to business and leadership. The metrics that governed corporate success had no way to measure the value of Daniel's expertise until it was tested in a crisis situation. The efficiency calculations that had eliminated his position at Morrison Aviation couldn't account for the knowledge that had just saved Lily's life. "Emma, I want you to take the rest of the week off to be with Lily," Victoria announced. "Full pay, and Sterling Aerospace will cover all medical expenses that aren't handled by insurance. Consider it family medical leave." Emma's gratitude was evident, but Victoria could see that she was also calculating the financial implications of taking time off work. Even with paid leave, the additional costs associated with Lily's hospitalization and recovery would strain a single mother's budget in ways that might create long-term financial stress. Victoria made another decision that felt both generous and strategically sound. "Actually, I'm giving you a raise, effective immediately. Your salary is being increased by 20%, and you're getting a promotion to executive assistant, with expanded responsibilities and better benefits." The promotion was both deserved and overdue. Emma had been managing increasingly complex responsibilities as Sterling Aerospace had grown, but her compensation had not kept pace with either her contributions or the company's success. Victoria realized that this pattern probably extended throughout the organization, with valuable employees being undercompensated while resources were directed toward executive bonuses and shareholder returns. "Ms. Sterling, that's incredibly generous, but I don't know if I can accept," Emma said, her natural caution asserting itself despite the obvious financial benefits of Victoria's offer. Victoria's response was firm and businesslike. "It's not generosity. It's recognizing value that should have been acknowledged long ago. You've been doing the work of someone at a higher pay grade for years, and it's time your compensation reflected your actual contributions to the company." Daniel observed this interaction with interest, noting how Victoria's perspective on employee compensation seemed to be evolving in real time. The crisis they had navigated together appeared to have catalyzed a broader reconsideration of how she valued the people who made her business success possible. "What about you, Mr. Torres?" Victoria asked, returning her attention to the job offer that remained unresolved. "Are you ready to discuss specifics, or do you need more time to consider the position?" Daniel's practical nature asserted itself as he thought through the logistics of transitioning from homelessness to corporate employment. "I would need time to find housing, to get appropriate clothing for a professional environment, to address some personal matters that I've been unable to handle while living on the street." Victoria's response indicated that she had been thinking about these practical considerations during their conversation. Sterling Aerospace maintains corporate housing for visiting consultants and temporary employees. You could use one of those apartments while you get established and find permanent housing that meets your needs. The offer of temporary housing removed one of Daniel's primary concerns about accepting the position. Finding an apartment without recent employment history, credit references, or the financial resources for security deposits and utility connections would have been nearly impossible. Corporate housing would provide the stability he needed to rebuild his professional life. "What about a start date?" Daniel asked, his questions becoming more practical as he began to seriously consider Victoria's proposal. Victoria's answer surprised both Daniel and Marcus with its immediacy. "Monday morning if you're ready. We have several helicopters that have been experiencing intermittent problems that our current maintenance team hasn't been able to resolve. Your first assignment would be to diagnose and fix those issues while training our existing technicians on the advanced troubleshooting techniques you use today." The rapid timeline reflected both the genuine urgency of Sterling Aerospace's maintenance challenges and Victoria's recognition that Daniel needed purposeful work as much as he needed financial stability. 8 months of homelessness had been not just economically devastating but also psychologically damaging, stripping away the sense of purpose and professional identity that came from using one's skills to solve meaningful problems. Marcus added his own perspective on the maintenance challenges that Daniel would be addressing. "We've had 3 different helicopters experience variations of the problem you solved today, different symptoms, but similar patterns of system failures that don't respond to standard troubleshooting procedures. Our maintenance contracts with outside firms have been expensive and not particularly effective." Daniel's interest was immediately engaged by the technical challenge represented by these recurring problems. "Are the failures happening on the same aircraft models, or are they distributed across different helicopter types?" Victoria pulled out her tablet and showed Daniel the maintenance records that Marcus had compiled over the past 6 months. The pattern of failures was indeed complex, affecting multiple aircraft types but following similar diagnostic signatures that suggested common underlying causes. "This is interesting," Daniel said, studying the data with the focused attention he brought to technical problems. "The failure pattern suggests that you're dealing with a systematic issue rather than individual aircraft problems. Probably something related to environmental factors or operating procedures that affects multiple aircraft types differently but stems from the same root cause." His analysis was already providing more insight than Sterling Aerospace's expensive maintenance consultants had delivered in months of investigation. Victoria could see that Daniel's diagnostic approach was fundamentally different from the standard troubleshooting methods that most technicians employed, based on deep understanding of aircraft systems rather than procedural checklists. "Are you interested in the challenge?" Victoria asked, though Daniel's engagement with the technical data had already provided her answer. Daniel looked up from the maintenance records with the kind of focused excitement that came from encountering a problem that would require all of his expertise to solve. "These are exactly the kind of complex diagnostic challenges that I spent 15 years learning to handle in the military. Standard maintenance procedures work fine for routine problems, but this requires understanding how different systems interact under various operating conditions." The enthusiasm in his voice was the first sign of professional passion Victoria had seen from him, evidence that beneath the worn clothing and weathered appearance was someone who genuinely loved the intellectual challenge of understanding and fixing complex mechanical systems. "Then it's settled," Victoria announced with the decisiveness that had characterized her most successful business decisions. "Daniel Torres, welcome to Sterling Aerospace. Your official title will be Chief Helicopter Systems Specialist, reporting directly to me, with full authority to implement whatever changes are necessary to resolve our maintenance issues." Daniel extended his hand to shake on the agreement, his grip firm despite the surreal nature of the situation. 12 hours earlier, he had been searching for food in a dumpster. Now he was being welcomed into a senior position at one of the aviation industry's most successful companies by the CEO, who had personally recruited him. "Thank you," Daniel said, his voice carrying gratitude that went beyond appreciation for employment opportunity. "You're giving me a chance to rebuild my life and reconnect with my daughter. That means more than any salary or benefits package." Victoria's response revealed her own emotional investment in Daniel's success. "You saved a little girl's life today. The least I can do is help you rebuild your own life." The practical arrangements were handled with the efficiency that characterized Victoria's approach to business challenges. Daniel would spend the weekend in corporate housing, getting established and preparing for his Monday morning start date. Sterling Aerospace's Human Resources Department would handle the administrative details of his hiring, including background checks that would confirm his military service and technical certifications. More importantly, Victoria arranged for Daniel to have access to resources that would help him transition from homelessness to professional employment. A corporate credit card for purchasing appropriate clothing and personal items, connection with social services that could help him navigate the bureaucratic challenges of reestablishing his identity and credit history, and access to counseling services that could address the psychological impact of his recent experiences. As they prepared to leave the rooftop, Emma approached Daniel with a question that had been forming throughout their conversation. "Mr. Torres, would you be willing to visit Lily when she gets back from Denver? She's going to want to thank you personally, and I think it would mean a lot to her to meet the person who helped save her life." Daniel's response was immediate and warm. "I would be honored to visit her. Children's curiosity about how things work is one of my favorite parts of this job. I'd be happy to answer any questions she has about helicopters or aviation or mechanical systems in general." The genuine affection in his voice when he spoke about children was not lost on Victoria, who was beginning to understand that Daniel's value as an employee would extend beyond his technical expertise. His patience with young minds and enthusiasm for sharing knowledge would make him an effective trainer for her existing maintenance team, someone who could transfer his deep understanding of aircraft systems to the next generation of technicians. As they rode the elevator down from the rooftop, Victoria found herself thinking about the broader implications of what had happened. The crisis that had brought Daniel into her life had exposed gaps in her understanding of both technical systems and human resources that needed to be addressed throughout Sterling Aerospace. The maintenance problems that had led to their emergency were symptomatic of larger issues in how the company approached expertise and professional development. The cost-cutting measures that had eliminated Daniel's position at Morrison Aviation had probably affected dozens of other qualified professionals whose knowledge and experience had been discarded in favor of cheaper alternatives. Victoria made a mental note to conduct a comprehensive review of Sterling Aerospace's contractor relationships and personnel decisions, looking for other situations where valuable expertise had been lost to efficiency calculations that failed to account for the true cost of reduced capability. The lobby of Sterling Tower was still busy with late-evening activity, employees working extended hours on projects that demanded immediate attention, security personnel managing access for the cleaning crews that maintained the building's pristine appearance, and a few reporters who had apparently decided to wait for additional developments in the story of Daniel's remarkable rescue. Victoria guided Daniel toward a side exit that would allow them to avoid the media attention that continued to surround his sudden prominence. The last thing he needed during his transition back to professional employment was the pressure and scrutiny that came with unwanted celebrity status. Tomorrow, I want you to spend some time getting familiar with our current helicopter fleet and maintenance procedures, Victoria told Daniel as they walked toward her car. Monday morning, you'll meet with our existing maintenance team and begin your assessment of the systematic problems we've been experiencing. Daniel nodded, his mind already working through the technical challenges he would be addressing. The maintenance records Victoria had shown him suggested problems that would require both diagnostic expertise and innovative solutions, exactly the kind of work that had made his military service professionally satisfying. "What about my background?" Daniel asked, raising a concern that had been weighing on his mind since accepting Victoria's offer. "When your current employees learn that you hired someone who's been homeless for 8 months, there might be questions about my qualifications and reliability." Victoria's response indicated that she had been thinking about this challenge as well. "Your qualifications speak for themselves. 15 years of military service, multiple commendations for technical excellence, and intimate knowledge of the systems that power our aircraft fleet. Anyone who questions your credentials can review your service record and your performance on the job." She paused at her car, a modest sedan that surprised Daniel with its lack of executive ostentation. "As for your recent circumstances, that's personal information that you can choose to share or keep private as you see fit. What matters is your ability to do the job effectively, not the challenges you've overcome to get here." The drive to the corporate housing facility gave Daniel his first opportunity to see Chicago from inside a vehicle in months. The city looked different from the passenger seat of Victoria's car than it did from the perspective of someone walking the streets with nowhere particular to go. The familiar landmarks took on new meaning when viewed as destinations he might actually visit rather than just scenery to pass on his way between places where he could find temporary shelter or occasional work. The corporate apartment was modest but comfortable, furnished with everything necessary for temporary residence. Daniel stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the simple luxury of having private space, running water, reliable heating, and security that didn't depend on staying alert for potential threats. The refrigerator is stocked with basics, and there's a grocery store within walking distance, Victoria explained, handing Daniel a folder containing keys, contact information, and instructions for accessing building amenities. "My direct phone number is in there if you need anything over the weekend or if you have questions about your start date." Daniel accepted the folder with hands that were steadier than he felt inside. The transition from homelessness to corporate employment was happening so quickly that he hadn't had time to process the emotional impact of such a dramatic change in circumstances. "Miss Sterling," Daniel said as Victoria prepared to leave, "I want you to know that I understand the significance of what you're doing. This isn't just a job offer. You're giving me a chance to rebuild my entire life, to reconnect with my daughter, to contribute something meaningful again." Victoria's response was characteristically direct. "You earned this opportunity by demonstrating expertise and character when it mattered most. All I'm doing is recognizing value that should have been acknowledged long ago." After Victoria left, Daniel stood alone in the corporate apartment, absorbing the reality of his dramatically changed circumstances. The shower was the first luxury he allowed himself, hot water and privacy that he hadn't experienced in months. The simple act of washing away the grime and stress of street living felt symbolic of the larger transformation that was beginning. As he stood under the hot water, Daniel found himself thinking about his daughter Sophia and the phone call he would finally be able to make. For 8 months, he had been unable to contact her because he had no stable phone number, no address where she could reach him, no way to explain his circumstances without causing her worry and confusion. Now he could call her with good news. Not just that he was safe and employed, but that he was working in his field again, using the expertise that had once made him proud of his professional identity. He could begin the process of rebuilding their relationship, of becoming the father she deserved, rather than a source of embarrassment or concern. The clothes he had been wearing went into the apartment's washing machine, though Daniel suspected he would never wear them again. They represented a chapter of his life that was ending, replaced by the possibility of professional clothing that reflected his restored status as a skilled aerospace technician. That night, Daniel slept in a real bed for the first time in 8 months, but his dreams were filled with visions of helicopters and technical diagrams and the satisfaction that came from solving complex problems. He dreamed about working alongside other professionals who shared his passion for aviation, about training younger technicians who would carry forward the knowledge he had accumulated over 2 decades of working with aircraft systems. Most importantly, he dreamed about Sophia's proud expression when she learned that her father was not only safe and employed, but was working at one of the most prestigious aerospace companies in the country. The possibility of rebuilding their relationship provided motivation that went beyond personal recovery to encompass the hope of restored family connections. Meanwhile, across the city in her own luxurious apartment, Victoria Sterling lay awake thinking about the day's events and their implications for her understanding of business leadership and social responsibility. The crisis that had brought Daniel Torres into her life had forced her to confront the human cost of corporate decisions that she had previously viewed only through the lens of operational efficiency. The irony was complex and uncomfortable. The same business philosophy that had built Sterling Aerospace into an industry leader had also contributed to the homelessness of someone whose expertise had proven essential when her company faced a genuine emergency. The contradiction challenged her fundamental assumptions about how successful organizations should operate and what responsibilities they had to the broader community. Victoria found herself questioning other decisions she had made in the name of efficiency and cost reduction. How many other qualified professionals had been displaced by her strategic choices? How many valuable relationships with contractors and suppliers had been terminated in favor of cheaper alternatives that might not provide the same level of expertise when it was truly needed? The questions were troubling, but they also represented an opportunity for growth and improvement. Victoria had built her career on the ability to recognize problems and implement solutions, to adapt Sterling Aerospace's strategies based on changing market conditions and new information about what worked most effectively. Perhaps it was time to apply that same analytical approach to the human resources and social impact aspects of her business operations. The success of Daniel's hiring would provide a test case for whether investing in expertise and character could generate better long-term results than focusing solely on cost minimization. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Victoria was already planning the broader organizational changes that Daniel's story had inspired. A comprehensive review of contractor relationships, a re-examination of personnel policies that might be missing valuable expertise, and a new framework for evaluating the true cost and benefit of business decisions that affected people's lives. The helicopter emergency that had started as a crisis had evolved into an opportunity for both personal and corporate transformation. Daniel Torres had gained more than employment. He had found a path back to professional identity and family connection. Victoria Sterling had gained more than a skilled technician. She had discovered a new understanding of leadership that balanced efficiency with humanity. Their partnership would be tested in the coming weeks as Daniel adapted to corporate employment, and Victoria implemented the organizational changes his story had inspired. But the foundation had been established through mutual respect, shared values, and the recognition that the most valuable achievements often emerged from the intersection of technical expertise and genuine human connection. The weekend passed quickly for Daniel, who spent his time preparing for his return to professional aviation work. He purchased appropriate clothing, reviewed technical manuals for Sterling Aerospace's helicopter fleet, and made the phone call to his daughter that had been months in the making. Sophia's voice was cautiously hopeful when she answered his call, recognizing his number but uncertain about what news he might be sharing. The conversation was emotional and complicated, requiring Daniel to explain his recent absence without burdening his 12-year-old daughter with details that might frighten or confuse her. "Dad, are you really working for Sterling Aerospace?" Sophia asked, her voice carrying the kind of excitement that came from recognizing a company name she had heard in news reports about aviation and technology. Daniel's confirmation filled him with pride that went beyond personal accomplishment to encompass the possibility of restored family relationships. "I am, sweetheart. I'm going to be working on helicopters again, using everything I learned in the Army to help solve complex technical problems." Sophia's next question revealed both her intelligence and her understanding of their family's recent challenges. "Does this mean you can visit me again? Mom said you were working overseas, but I was worried that something bad had happened." The innocence and concern in her voice made Daniel's chest tight with regret for the months they had lost and determination to rebuild their connection. "It means I can visit you very soon, and that we can start spending regular time together again. I've missed you more than you can possibly know." Their conversation continued for over an hour, covering Sophia's school activities, her continued interest in mechanical engineering, and her plans for a science fair project that would benefit from her father's professional expertise. Daniel found himself remembering why fatherhood had always been more fulfilling than any professional achievement, why Sophia's happiness and development mattered more than any corporate success or public recognition. Sunday evening found Daniel reviewing technical specifications for Sterling Aerospace's helicopter fleet, preparing for his first day of work with the thoroughness that had characterized his approach to military service. The maintenance records Victoria had shown him suggested problems that would require both diagnostic creativity and systematic analysis, exactly the kind of challenges that had made his previous career professionally satisfying. As he studied the technical data, Daniel began to see patterns that confirmed his initial assessment of systematic issues affecting multiple aircraft types. The solutions would require not just individual repairs, but comprehensive changes to maintenance procedures and possibly aircraft operating protocols. Monday morning arrived with the crisp clarity of a Chicago autumn day that seemed to promise new beginnings and fresh possibilities. Daniel dressed in his new professional attire, noting how different he looked and felt compared to just 3 days earlier. The transformation was more than cosmetic. It represented a restoration of professional identity that had been absent from his life for 8 months. Sterling Aerospace's maintenance facility was located in a modern building adjacent to the company's primary helicopter operations, equipped with the latest diagnostic equipment and staffed by technicians whose expertise Daniel would need to assess and potentially enhance. Victoria was waiting for him in the facility's main work area, dressed in practical clothing that indicated she intended to be directly involved in his orientation rather than simply making an executive appearance. Her presence sent a clear message to the existing maintenance team about the importance she placed on Daniel's integration into their operations. "Good morning, Daniel," Victoria said, her greeting carrying warmth that indicated genuine pleasure at seeing him begin his new career phase. "Are you ready to meet the team and get started on our systematic maintenance challenges?" Daniel's response carried confidence that reflected both his technical expertise and his commitment to making Victoria's investment in him successful. "I'm ready. Let's see what we're dealing with and figure out how to solve these problems once and for all." The Sterling Aerospace maintenance facility buzzed with the controlled energy of professionals who took pride in their work, but Daniel could sense an underlying tension as he was introduced to the team of 12 technicians who would become his colleagues and, in many cases, his students. Their expressions ranged from curious to skeptical, with several clearly wondering why Victoria Sterling had personally recruited someone whose background they knew nothing about. Lead technician Robert Chen, a veteran with 25 years of aviation maintenance experience, stepped forward to shake Daniel's hand with the kind of firm grip that served as both greeting and assessment. His weathered face bore the concentration lines that came from years of working with precision instruments and complex mechanical systems, and his direct gaze suggested someone who judged people based on competence rather than credentials. "Welcome to the team," Robert said, his tone neutral but not unfriendly. "Miss Sterling tells us you have experience with the kind of systematic problems we've been fighting for months." "I hope that's true, because we're running out of ideas and patience." Daniel appreciated the directness of Robert's approach, recognizing a fellow professional who valued results over diplomacy. "I've reviewed the maintenance logs, and I think I understand the pattern you're dealing with. These aren't random equipment failures. They're symptomatic of a fundamental issue that affects multiple aircraft types differently but stems from the same root cause." Sarah Martinez, a younger technician with specialized training in avionics systems, looked up from the diagnostic equipment she'd been calibrating. Her expression showed interest mixed with skepticism about Daniel's confident assessment of problems that had stumped the entire team for months. What kind of root cause? Sarah asked, her question carrying the challenge of someone who had spent countless hours trying to identify exactly that kind of systematic issue. We've checked everything from fuel system contamination to electromagnetic interference patterns, and nothing explains the diverse failure modes we're seeing. Daniel's response demonstrated both technical knowledge and respect for the work the team had already done. You've been looking at the right areas, but the problem is probably more subtle than contamination or interference. Based on the failure patterns, I suspect you're dealing with calibration drift in environmental sensors that occurs gradually over time and affects different aircraft systems in ways that don't show up until they reach critical thresholds. Victoria watched this exchange with growing confidence in her decision to hire Daniel. His technical explanation was both sophisticated and accessible, delivered with the kind of authority that came from deep understanding rather than theoretical knowledge. More importantly, he was engaging with her existing team as colleagues rather than positioning himself as their superior, despite his new title and direct reporting relationship to her. Robert's expression shifted from skepticism to genuine interest, as Daniel's explanation resonated with observations he'd made, but hadn't been able to connect into a coherent theory. That would explain why the failures seem to happen randomly, but follow similar diagnostic signatures. Environmental sensors gradually reporting incorrect data would cause different systems to malfunction in ways that seem unrelated. Daniel nodded, pleased that his analysis was connecting with Robert's experience. Exactly. And because the drift happens slowly, standard calibration procedures don't catch it until the sensors are so far out of specification that multiple systems start failing simultaneously. Sarah leaned forward, her engineering training engaged by the elegance of Daniel's hypothesis. How would we test that theory? Environmental sensor calibration requires specialized equipment and procedures that we don't routinely perform unless we're responding to specific failure indicators. Daniel's answer revealed both his technical depth and his practical approach to problem solving. We start with a comprehensive baseline calibration of all environmental sensors on the aircraft that have experienced failures. Then we compare those readings to the sensors on aircraft that haven't had problems yet. If I'm right, we'll find systematic differences that correlate with the maintenance issues you've been experiencing. The methodology was sound and straightforward, but it would require several days of intensive diagnostic work to gather the data needed to confirm or refute Daniel's theory. Victoria could see that her maintenance team was both intrigued by the possibility of finally solving their systematic problems and somewhat intimidated by the scope of testing Daniel was proposing. How long would that kind of comprehensive sensor analysis take? Victoria asked, recognizing that the testing would require significant resources and might temporarily reduce the availability of aircraft for regular operations. Robert calculated quickly, his experience allowing him to estimate the time requirements for the kind of detailed diagnostic work Daniel was describing. With the full team working on it, probably 3 days to gather baseline data from all affected aircraft, another 2 days to analyze the results and identify patterns. Daniel added his own perspective on the timeline, based on similar diagnostic challenges he'd faced during military service. If we're systematic about the data collection and use the right analytical tools, we might be able to identify the patterns sooner. But Robert's estimate is realistic for a thorough investigation that would give us definitive answers. Victoria made the kind of decisive commitment that had characterized her most successful business strategies. Do it. Whatever resources you need, whatever impact on our regular operations, solving this problem is the priority. We can't continue operating with systematic maintenance issues that could compromise safety or reliability. The next 3 days transformed the maintenance facility into something resembling a research laboratory, with teams of technicians conducting detailed sensor calibrations on every helicopter in Sterling Aerospace's fleet. Daniel worked alongside Robert and Sarah, sharing diagnostic techniques he'd learned in military service while learning about the specific characteristics of civilian aircraft systems that differed from his previous experience. The collaborative atmosphere that developed during the intensive testing period impressed Victoria, who observed that Daniel's integration with her existing team was proceeding more smoothly than she had dared hope. His technical expertise commanded respect, but his willingness to learn from his new colleagues and acknowledge their contributions created a partnership dynamic rather than a hierarchical relationship. On Wednesday afternoon, Sarah called out from her workstation with excitement that carried across the entire facility. "I found it! Daniel was right about the sensor drift, but it's even more specific than we thought." The data Sarah had compiled showed a clear pattern of environmental sensor degradation that affected different aircraft types at different rates based on their operating hours and environmental exposure. Aircraft that flew frequently in varying weather conditions showed more rapid sensor drift than those used primarily for short-range flights in stable atmospheric conditions. Daniel studied Sarah's analysis with growing satisfaction at seeing his theoretical diagnosis confirmed by empirical evidence. This explains everything. The sensors weren't failing randomly. They were degrading predictably based on operational stress factors that nobody was tracking systematically. Robert joined them at Sarah's workstation, reviewing the data with the expression of someone who had finally found the missing piece of a complex puzzle. And because we were calibrating sensors on a scheduled maintenance basis rather than based on operational exposure, we were missing the degradation until it reached critical levels. The solution that emerged from their analysis was both elegant and comprehensive. Instead of calibrating environmental sensors on arbitrary time schedules, Sterling Aerospace would implement condition-based calibration that tracked operational factors and adjusted maintenance intervals based on actual sensor performance rather than theoretical projections. Victoria reviewed their findings with the kind of focused attention she brought to major strategic decisions, recognizing that Daniel's diagnostic success had implications beyond solving their immediate maintenance problems. The methodology he'd introduced could be applied to other aircraft systems, potentially preventing future problems and improving overall fleet reliability. "How quickly can we implement the new calibration protocols?" Victoria asked, already thinking about the operational improvements that would result from more accurate maintenance scheduling. Daniel's answer reflected both his technical confidence and his understanding of the practical challenges involved in changing established procedures. The actual calibration work can start immediately for aircraft that are due for scheduled maintenance. Full fleet implementation would take about 6 weeks, with aircraft being updated as they cycle through regular service intervals. Sarah added her perspective on the training implications of the new protocols. "The existing team can handle the technical procedures, but we'll need to modify our diagnostic software and update our maintenance documentation to reflect the new condition-based scheduling approach." Victoria's response demonstrated her commitment to implementing Daniel's solution completely rather than pursuing half measures that might compromise its effectiveness. "Whatever software modifications or documentation updates are required, make it happen. I want this new system fully operational within 2 months." The successful resolution of Sterling Aerospace's systematic maintenance problems established Daniel's credibility with both the technical team and the broader organization. Word of his diagnostic success spread through the company, generating the kind of positive internal recognition that made his transition from homelessness to senior technical position feel less dramatic to colleagues who hadn't witnessed his unlikely recruitment. But Daniel's personal satisfaction came not just from professional success, but from the restored sense of purpose that accompanied using his expertise to solve meaningful problems. The work reminded him of why he had chosen aviation maintenance as a career, the intellectual challenge of understanding complex systems, and the practical satisfaction of keeping sophisticated machinery operating safely and efficiently. 3 weeks into his employment at Sterling Aerospace, Daniel received a phone call that represented another step in rebuilding his personal life. Sophia's voice carried excitement as she shared news about her science fair project and asked if he could visit to help her with the technical aspects of her engineering demonstration. "Dad, I'm building a model helicopter that actually flies, but I need help with the rotor dynamics and control systems," Sophia explained, her enthusiasm reminding Daniel of his own fascination with aviation technology when he was her age. "My teacher says it's the most ambitious project in the class, but I want to make sure I understand the engineering principles correctly." Daniel's heart swelled with pride at his daughter's intellectual curiosity and ambition. The opportunity to work with her on a technical project represented exactly the kind of father-daughter bonding he had missed during his months of homelessness, the chance to share his professional knowledge with someone who genuinely wanted to learn. "I would love to help you with your helicopter project," Daniel told her, his voice carrying warmth that reflected both paternal affection and professional excitement about her engineering interests. "When would be a good time for me to visit?" Sophia's immediate response indicated that she had been hoping for exactly this kind of collaboration. "This weekend? Mom says you're working for a really important company now, and I want to hear all about the helicopters you fix and how you learned to be such a good mechanic." The conversation with Sophia provided Daniel with motivation that went beyond personal recovery to encompass the possibility of positive influence on the next generation. His daughter's interest in engineering and aviation offered him the chance to share knowledge and inspire curiosity in ways that could shape her future career choices and educational priorities. Saturday morning found Daniel driving through the suburban neighborhood where Sophia lived with his ex-wife, experiencing a mixture of nervousness and anticipation about re-establishing regular contact with his daughter. The modest house looked exactly as he remembered, surrounded by mature trees and maintained with the kind of careful attention that spoke of stable family life. Sophia answered the door with a smile that reminded Daniel of all the reasons fatherhood had always been more important to him than any professional achievement. At 12, she had grown taller and more mature during their months of separation, but her eyes still held the bright curiosity that had always made their time together special. "Dad!" Sophia exclaimed, hugging him with enthusiasm that dissolved any remaining anxiety about how she might react to his return after such a long absence. "I'm so excited you're here. Wait until you see what I've been working on." Sophia's science fair project occupied most of her bedroom desk, a sophisticated model helicopter with functional rotors and a basic control system that demonstrated remarkable engineering ambition for a middle school student. Daniel studied her work with genuine admiration, noting the attention to detail and theoretical understanding that had guided her construction process. "This is impressive work," Daniel told her, meaning every word. "You've got the rotor pitch angles calculated correctly, and your control system design shows real understanding of how helicopter flight dynamics work." Sophia beamed at her father's professional assessment, clearly pleased that her project met his technical standards. "I've been reading about helicopter engineering online, and I found some of your old military training manuals in the garage. Mom said I could use them for research." The revelation that Sophia had been studying his old technical materials provided Daniel with evidence of how much their connection meant to her, even during his absence. She had maintained her interest in aviation and engineering partly as a way of staying connected to him, using his professional knowledge as a bridge across the months when direct contact hadn't been possible. They spent the morning working together on refinements to Sophia's helicopter design, with Daniel explaining the aerodynamic principles that governed rotor performance, while Sophia asked questions that demonstrated both intelligence and genuine fascination with the subject matter. The collaboration felt natural and fulfilling, restoring the father-daughter dynamic that had been one of the most valuable aspects of Daniel's life before his career crisis. "Dad, can you tell me about your new job?" Sophia asked during a break in their technical work. "Are you really working on million-dollar helicopters for important people?" Daniel's answer balanced honesty about his professional responsibilities with age-appropriate explanations of the work he was doing at Sterling Aerospace. "I'm working on very sophisticated helicopters that are used for medical emergencies, business transportation, and other important missions. The technology is more advanced than anything I worked on in the Army, which makes it challenging and interesting." Sophia's next question revealed both her understanding of their family's recent challenges and her pride in her father's professional recovery. "Is your boss nice? Mom was worried that you might have trouble finding work after being away for so long." The question provided Daniel with an opportunity to share some of the extraordinary circumstances that had led to his employment at Sterling Aerospace, though he simplified the story to focus on Victoria's recognition of his technical expertise, rather than the dramatic details of the helicopter emergency that had brought them together. "My boss is someone who understands the value of experience and expertise," Daniel explained. "She hired me because she needed someone who could solve complex technical problems, and she was willing to look past recent circumstances to focus on what I could contribute to her company." Sophia's expression showed satisfaction with this explanation, as if her faith in her father's abilities had been validated by someone in a position of authority and responsibility. "I'm proud of you, Dad. I always knew you were really good at fixing things, and now other people know it too." The afternoon progressed with continued work on Sophia's science project, punctuated by conversations about her school activities, her friends, and her thoughts about potential career paths that might combine her interests in engineering and science. Daniel found himself remembering why being Sophia's father had always been the most important and rewarding role in his life. As evening approached and Daniel prepared to return to his corporate apartment, Sophia asked a question that indicated her hope for continuing their renewed relationship. Can we work on projects together regularly now? I have so many ideas for things I want to build and learn about. Daniel's response carried both commitment and joy at the prospect of regular father-daughter collaboration. Absolutely. We can work on projects every weekend, and I can help you with any technical questions you have during the week. Being your engineering consultant is going to be my favorite part of this job. The drive back to Chicago provided Daniel with time to reflect on how completely his life had been transformed in just 3 weeks. From homelessness and desperation to meaningful work and restored family relationships, the change seemed almost too dramatic to be real. Yet the evidence was undeniable. He was successfully employed in his chosen profession, living in stable housing, and rebuilding connections with the people who mattered most to him. Monday morning brought news that would further validate Daniel's value to Sterling Aerospace and establish his reputation within the broader aviation industry. Victoria called him into her office with an expression that mixed excitement with business opportunity, indicating that his diagnostic success had attracted attention from outside the company. Daniel, I've received calls from 3 other aerospace companies asking about the condition-based calibration protocols you developed, Victoria announced, her tone carrying the satisfaction of someone whose investment in talent had proven even more valuable than expected. They want to license our methodology for their own maintenance operations. The revelation that other companies were interested in Daniel's innovations provided him with professional validation that went beyond his successful integration at Sterling Aerospace. His diagnostic techniques weren't just solving one company's problems. They represented genuine advances in aviation maintenance methodology that could benefit the entire industry. What kind of licensing arrangements are they proposing? Daniel asked, his business instincts engaged by the possibility that his technical innovations could generate revenue for Sterling Aerospace beyond their internal operational benefits. Victoria's answer revealed the scope of interest in Daniel's work and its potential commercial value. Substantial fees for access to our calibration protocols and training programs, plus ongoing royalties based on the maintenance savings they achieve. We're looking at potentially millions of dollars in licensing revenue over the next 5 years. The financial implications were significant, but Daniel was more interested in the professional recognition that licensing request represented. His expertise was being acknowledged by industry peers as genuinely innovative rather than simply competent. Validation that his technical knowledge had value beyond solving immediate problems. I'd like to be involved in the licensing discussions, Daniel said, recognizing an opportunity to expand his role within Sterling Aerospace while contributing to the broader advancement of aviation maintenance practices. These protocols could be refined and improved based on feedback from other companies' implementations. Victoria's response indicated that she had been hoping Daniel would express interest in the commercial aspects of his innovations. That's exactly what I was thinking. I want you to lead our new Technical Innovation Division, responsible for developing and licensing advanced maintenance methodologies. It would be a significant promotion with correspondingly expanded responsibilities and compensation. The promotion offer represented another dramatic advancement in Daniel's professional recovery, moving him from individual contributor to division leadership in less than a month. The opportunity was both exciting and somewhat overwhelming, requiring skills in business development and team management that went beyond his technical expertise. What would the division look like? Daniel asked, his practical nature asserting itself as he considered the implications of accepting such expanded responsibilities. Victoria's vision for Technical Innovation Division reflected her growing understanding of how expertise and innovation could generate competitive advantages that went beyond operational efficiency. Initially, a team of 5 senior technicians focused on developing and testing advanced maintenance protocols. As our licensing business grows, we'd expand to include training specialists, business development professionals, and research partnerships with aerospace engineering schools. The scope of Victoria's proposal indicated her confidence in Daniel's leadership potential and her commitment to making Sterling Aerospace a leader in aviation maintenance innovation rather than simply a user of existing methodologies. The division would represent a substantial investment in research and development that could position the company at the forefront of industry advancement. Daniel's acceptance of the promotion came after careful consideration of both the opportunities and challenges it would present. I'm interested, but I want to make sure I can maintain direct involvement in technical work rather than becoming purely administrative. The innovation comes from hands-on problem solving, not just managing other people's research. Victoria's agreement to structure the position around Daniel's strengths and interests demonstrated her understanding of what made him valuable as both a technician and a leader. The division leadership role would be about 60% technical work and 40% management and business development. You'd continue solving complex problems while also building the team and relationships that can scale your innovations across the industry. The promotion was formalized the following week, with Daniel's new title of Director of Technical Innovation carrying both recognition of his contributions and expectations for continued advancement of Sterling Aerospace's maintenance capabilities. The salary increase that accompanied his promotion provided him with financial stability that went beyond basic security to encompass the ability to plan for long-term goals, like eventually purchasing a house near Sophia's school. More importantly, the promotion established Daniel as a recognized leader within Sterling Aerospace's technical community, someone whose expertise was valued not just for solving immediate problems, but for developing solutions that could benefit the entire aviation industry. The recognition felt like validation of everything he had worked to achieve throughout his military service and civilian career. 6 months after his improbable recruitment from homelessness to corporate leadership, Daniel stood before an audience of aviation maintenance professionals at the International Helicopter Maintenance Conference, presenting the condition-based calibration protocols that had transformed Sterling Aerospace's fleet reliability. The presentation represented not just professional achievement but personal vindication of his worth as a technical innovator. The audience's response to his presentation was enthusiastically positive, with multiple companies expressing interest in implementing his methodologies and several asking about consulting arrangements that could help them address their own systematic maintenance challenges. Daniel's expertise was being recognized at the highest levels of the aviation industry. Victoria watched his presentation from the audience, feeling pride that went beyond business success to encompass personal satisfaction at having recognized and nurtured talent that others had overlooked. Daniel's transformation from homeless veteran to industry leader vindicated her growing belief that the most valuable business investments were often in people whose potential wasn't immediately obvious to conventional assessment methods. After the conference, Daniel and Victoria flew back to Chicago in one of Sterling Aerospace's helicopters, the same type of aircraft that had brought them together during Lily Rodriguez's medical emergency. The flight provided them with an opportunity to reflect on how much their professional and personal relationship had evolved since that desperate day on the Sterling Tower rooftop. "Any regrets about refusing that $1 million reward?" Victoria asked, referring to Daniel's initial rejection of payment for fixing the helicopter that had saved Lily's life. Daniel's response reflected both professional satisfaction and personal growth that had resulted from his unlikely recruitment to Sterling Aerospace. "No regrets at all. What I gained from joining your company has been worth far more than any one-time payment. I got my life back, my relationship with Sophia, and work that challenges me in ways I'd forgotten were possible." Victoria's own reflection on their partnership revealed how much her understanding of business leadership had evolved through working with Daniel. "I learned something important from hiring you. The most valuable people are often the ones who've been overlooked by conventional assessment methods. Experience, character, and problem-solving ability matter more than perfect resumes or comfortable circumstances." Their conversation was interrupted by a call from Emma Rodriguez, who had become Sterling Aerospace's Director of Operations following her promotion and salary increase. Emma's voice carried excitement as she shared news about Lily's continued recovery and her growing interest in aviation technology. "Lily wants to know if Mr. Torres can visit her science class next month," Emma reported. "She's been telling everyone about the helicopter mechanic who saved her life, and her teacher thinks it would be educational for the students to meet a real aviation expert." Daniel's immediate acceptance of the invitation reflected his ongoing commitment to sharing knowledge with young people whose curiosity about technology could shape their future career choices. Working with Sophia on her engineering projects had reminded him how much he enjoyed inspiring the next generation of technical professionals. The visit to Lily's elementary school provided Daniel with another opportunity to see the broader impact of his work at Sterling Aerospace. Lily had grown taller and healthier in the months since her cardiac surgery, her energy and enthusiasm showing no signs of the medical crisis that had brought Daniel into Victoria's life. "Mr. Torres, I remember you," Lily announced when Daniel arrived at her classroom, her smile bright with recognition and gratitude. "You're the one who fixed the helicopter, so I could go to the hospital and get my heart fixed." Daniel's response carried warmth that reflected genuine affection for the little girl whose medical emergency had catalyzed his professional recovery. "I remember you too, Lily. You were very brave that day, and I'm so happy to see how well you're doing now." The presentation Daniel gave to Lily's class about helicopter engineering and aviation careers was enthusiastically received by students whose questions demonstrated genuine interest in understanding how complex machines operated. Several students expressed interest in pursuing engineering or aviation careers, inspired by Daniel's explanation of how technical knowledge could be used to solve important problems and help people. After the classroom presentation, Lily approached Daniel with a question that revealed both her intelligence and her understanding of the connection between his work and her recovery. "Mr. Torres, are you going to keep fixing helicopters so they can help other kids who get sick?" Daniel's answer carried both professional commitment and personal motivation that had driven his career choices throughout his adult life. "Yes, Lily. I'm going to keep working on helicopters and training other people to fix them so they'll always be ready when someone needs help." The interaction with Lily and her classmates provided Daniel with renewed appreciation for the broader purpose behind his technical work. Aviation maintenance wasn't just about keeping sophisticated machinery operational. It was about ensuring that critical transportation resources were available when people faced genuine emergencies. As Daniel's first year at Sterling Aerospace drew to a close, he reflected on the extraordinary transformation his life had undergone since that desperate evening when he had approached the security desk in Sterling Tower's lobby, claiming he could fix a helicopter that had stumped the company's best technicians. The homeless veteran searching for food in dumpsters had become a recognized industry leader, whose innovations were being implemented by aerospace companies around the world. But the professional achievements, while satisfying, were less important to Daniel than the personal relationships he had rebuilt and the sense of purpose he had rediscovered. His weekend visits with Sophia had become a highlight of both their lives, collaborative engineering projects that strengthened their father-daughter bond while nurturing her growing interest in technical careers. Victoria's investment in Daniel's potential had generated returns that went far beyond the financial benefits of improved maintenance protocols and licensing revenue. His success had validated her evolving understanding of leadership and social responsibility, demonstrating that the most valuable business decisions often involved recognizing human potential that others had overlooked. The partnership between Victoria Sterling and Daniel Torres had transformed both their lives while proving that expertise, character, and determination could overcome even the most challenging circumstances. Their story became a model within Sterling Aerospace for how individual opportunity and corporate success could be mutually reinforcing when leaders were willing to look beyond conventional assessments of value and potential. On the first anniversary of Daniel's hiring, Sterling Aerospace celebrated not just his professional achievements but the broader cultural changes his presence had inspired throughout the organization. Employee satisfaction had increased as Victoria implemented policies that recognized and rewarded expertise regardless of how it was packaged. Contractor relationships had been restructured to prioritize long-term partnerships over short-term cost savings. Most importantly, Sterling Aerospace had become known throughout the aviation industry as a company that valued innovation, character, and human potential above traditional credentials and conventional thinking. The reputation attracted talented professionals who might otherwise have been overlooked by companies focused solely on standard qualifications and efficient hiring processes. Daniel's story continued to inspire people throughout the aviation industry and beyond, proving that homelessness and professional displacement didn't define someone's ultimate potential for contribution and achievement. His transformation from desperate circumstances to industry leadership provided hope for others facing similar challenges while demonstrating the value of giving people opportunities to prove their worth through performance rather than credentials. Victoria Sterling's evolution from efficiency-focused executive to leader who balanced business success with social responsibility created a new model for corporate leadership that prioritized both profitability and human development. Her willingness to recognize Daniel's potential despite his circumstances had generated benefits that extended far beyond their individual relationship to encompass positive changes throughout Sterling Aerospace and the broader aviation community. The helicopter that had failed to start on that desperate evening had become a symbol of possibility and redemption, proving that the most valuable solutions often came from unexpected sources, and that the most important business decisions were often about recognizing human potential rather than maximizing short-term efficiency. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.